What if the federal government could punish your city just for disagreeing with its politics? That's exactly what courts keep blocking, and here's why.
Last year, the Trump administration started trying to condition federal grants whether cities and counties support federal immigration enforcement. This is a question for Professor Vladeck. They tried conditioning FEMA emergency preparedness funding. They tried conditioning Department of Transportation infrastructure funding. This regime has a propensity to tie various kinds of funding to various ideological positions that this regime takes. And by the way, the regime keeps losing in court. Professor Vladeck, why does Trump keep losing in court and trying to withhold funding for these other very important programs that our communities rely upon?
Well, Senator, I think the short answer is because, as the Supreme Court has said for decades, there are 4 different conditions that federal spending conditions have to satisfy to be constitutional. And the conditions that the Trump administration has imposed have violated, Senator, somewhere between 2 and 3 of them, depending upon which condition we're talking about.
Name one condition that they've violated.
So, first of all, the conditions have to be clearly expressed in law. An executive order that interprets a statute to allow the president to impose a condition is not clearly expressing that condition in law. The condition has to be substantially related to the purpose of the funds, tying all of the state's transportation funding to whether it does or does not ban DEI practices is not related to transportation funding. And then the third category is some of the grant cancellations and some of the spending cancellations are seemingly First Amendment retaliation. So they run into the third problem.
Everyone should understand that executive orders, which is how this president wants to run the country, apparently, in addition to taking us into an undeclared, therefore illegal war, is by executive order. That is not law. And that is why there are over 500 lawsuits that have been filed by various entities, organizations, states to prevent this regime from its continuing lawlessness. So let me go. In fact, the courts require things like, how about evidence? Thank goodness the courts still require factual evidence in order for the courts to go along with this regime. Again, for Professor Vladeck, local law enforcement already have a lot of important missions. They respond to mental health challenges, missing children, wildlife encounters. They perform welfare checks, direct traffic, provide first aid, and conduct search and rescue. They help the public during natural and man-made disasters. And right now, Hawaii law enforcement officers are helping our North Shore communities dig out from a massive flood. That is what local law enforcement does. Of course, that is all in addition to preventing and responding to crime and ensuring public safety. Professor Vladeck, local law enforcement, as I mentioned, does a lot of things. And for this, they require the trust of the community. So in your view, are they also required by either federal law or the Constitution to enforce federal immigration law in order to everything that they already do on behalf of the community?
So they're not required to, Senator, and indeed I'm not sure they can be compelled to. But if I might briefly, I think that the relevant point is that different localities are going to have different priorities. And those priorities are going to vary based upon who the populace is, based upon what happens in that locality. New York City and a small town in Montana are not going to have the same law enforcement priorities. And so part of what this constitutional structure recognizes, for better or for worse, and I'm not here to suggest that this is what I would have chosen if it were up to me, is that local governments are in a better position to make those calls. They're more accountable to their elected, to their populaces, and that the federal government doesn't have the power to tell local governments what their policy choices ought to be.
This is for Sheriff Burkett. Thank you. The president's obsession with deportations isn't making Americans safer. In fact, just look at what ICE is doing in Minnesota, in Chicago, and other places. And it is terrorizing communities and further eroding the relationship between immigrant communities and law enforcement. Sheriff Burkett, what is the importance of trust with local law enforcement, as long as we're talking about how important that is to enable local law enforcement to provide public safety?
Madam Senator, it is critically important that we secure and maintain that level of trust with our public. It's impossible for my deputies to do the job that we do day in and day out. As you already articulated, we do a number of things and we provide a number of services to the community. But when that trust is broken, then we're unable to provide services. We're unable to solve crimes as effectively as we would like to. And unfortunately, what we've seen play out over the past few months with ICE and CBP coming into our communities, it has eroded that trust and has dismantled our ability to be successful in combating crime.
And by the way, that trust takes time to build.
Yes, it does.
So, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a Perspectives on Politics article entitled, quote, How Interior Immigration Enforcement Affects Trust in Law Enforcement, end quote, which finds a significant decrease in trust of local public and police and sheriffs when they support federal immigration enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. That'll conclude the hearing. Written questions for the record can be submitted until Wednesday, April 1st at 5 p.m. We ask the witnesses to submit their responses within 2 weeks. So by Wednesday, April.
What you just watched might sound like a technical legal debate about federal funding, but underneath it is a fundamental question about power. Who has it, how far it can go, and what protects communities from overreach? Because at the center of this exchange is a pattern. Efforts by the administration under Donald Trump to tie federal funding, money that communities rely on for emergency preparedness, infrastructure, and public safety, to political or ideological conditions. And on the surface, that might not sound unreasonable. Governments set conditions on funding all the time. But here's where the law draws a line. As the legal expert explains, the Constitution doesn't give the federal government unlimited power to attach whatever conditions it wants to federal money. There are rules, clear, long-standing rules established by the Supreme Court of the United States. First, conditions have to be clearly written into law, not just created through executive orders. Second, they have to be related to the purpose of the funding. You can't, for example, tie transportation money to unrelated political demands. And third, they cannot violate constitutional protections like the First Amendment. And what's being argued here is that many of these funding conditions fail those tests.
That's why they keep getting challenged. That's why they keep getting blocked. And that's why this matters, because when federal funding is used as leverage to force local governments to adopt certain policies, especially policies that may not reflect the needs or priorities of their communities, it raises serious constitutional concerns. Now, take this one step further.
The senator shifts the focus to local law enforcement, and this is where the real-world impact becomes clear. Local police departments are already responsible for a wide range of duties, responding to emergencies, helping during disasters, protecting public safety. So the question becomes, can the federal government force them to take on immigration enforcement responsibilities as well? And the answer, according to constitutional principles, is no. If this breakdown helped you understand what's really at stake beyond the legal language, don't keep it to yourself. Share this with someone who needs to see how these decisions affect real communities. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep demanding accountability, because that's how democracy stays strong.